Hello and welcome to episode 298 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here once again, as always, with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello. Good to be back.
Hello, Jason.
What did I miss
Welcome
last week?
back. I mean, you missed a great time in Stockholm, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Next year.
Where were you, sir?
I vanished to Virginia for work, so you didn't miss anything. I'll tell you, the concept of flying on 12 hours in from Asia, getting a couple hours of sleep, and then turning around on the 6 a.m. flight to Virginia was questionable. I think I made the right call, but I'm still paying for it by trying to sleep off the jet lag over a week later.
I don't know what to tell you.
Stockholm next year. I hear the bright sun and long daylight hours that time of year in that region really helps defeat the jet lag.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it does. All of the sun that I saw for approximately 12 and a half minutes throughout the entire week.
Yes, you can have sunlight for 1 hour or the other hour.
Yes, that is very true. You did miss a good week in Stockholm. I'm sad you couldn't be there. We went curling as a company, and I'm now considering taking up curling. This is going to become a curling podcast.
Wow, I am all for it. That's one of my favorite Winter Olympic sports to watch. I didn't know that was a thing in Stockholm.
Oh, yeah. No, it's huge. A former Olympic curler.
Thing.
No, I mean, it's big in Stockholm. A former Olympic curler taught me how to curl. And might I add that I think by the end of it, I was starting to get the hang of it. So
now I'm really upset that I missed out this year.
Well, see, it just makes you want to come for next year. But I will say that it's nice to get everybody together because you get a great overview of what everyone's working on, kind of in various stages of production when we're all in the same room. So that's nice. Some really cool stuff coming up, actually by the close of the year, it looks like, based on the release schedule, and then into next year. So we've got some great stuff. Some things that we've been talking about for a while now, like the cross-platform filters, those are at the finish line. So we're getting ready for that to come out to the apps so that you'll be able to set filters across all the platforms. So if you've got an iPhone, you use your computer, and you, for some reason, also have an Android device, if you set a filter, it'll be there across all three devices, and it will be just one filter. You won't have to set things up over and over again. So I'm looking forward to getting that out. And then there's all sorts of really cool stuff. And there's so much stuff going on behind the scenes to make the actual tracking of the flights better, which is what hopefully we'll be able to talk about in the new year. So I'm really looking forward to that. But it was a good week. I'm sad you weren't there. But I mean, you were off in Taiwan and Japan. So I don't feel terrible for you.
No, that was bad, before the day that we typically record. I was firmly
right
in the depressing parts of Virginia that Wednesday. But I was fresh off Japan, Taiwan, and some very fun train stuff, some very fun flight stuff, though not as fun as Jeremy. Maybe we'll have him on another time. But he flew, I think it was 6 Japanese airlines in one day, or 6 flights within Japan in one day. That's kind of crazy.
Something wrong with him, but it did sound like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I got to fly on, I think it was the 11th or 12th ever produced 787 with JAL, and then also an absolutely brand new A350-1000. So kind of covered both ends of the spectrum there with them.
That's not a bad way to do it. Yeah, and then I flew back from Stockholm via Copenhagen, as I unfortunately now have to do, because the nonstop is long gone and never coming back. But it was such a it was comparatively a very long flight because of the heavy winds that were wreaking havoc and making London landings a very interesting time on Saturday. But we just flew slow. We were under 400 knots over the ground for most of the flight.
Oof.
It was a bit rough. I did have a chance to talk to the pilots, and they were a little excited. So for those that don't know, a big part of the pilot flying's job on a long haul flight is to constantly calculate where to go if things go bad. And as we were flying, we passed over Iceland and then over Greenland. So the pilots mentioned that one of the cool things as of a few weeks ago is that Nuke is now an available diversion point. So they can now use the new airport and the new runway at Nuke as a diversion point. The thing here was that the winds were 16 knots, gusting to 38 knots.
Oof.
But here's what I learned, and this was interesting to me. The crosswind on a runway, the allowable crosswind for landing on a runway, also has a lot to do with the runway braking action. And I never put two and two together, but it makes perfect sense that, whether or not you want to use a certain runway, given the crosswind component, depends a lot on how well you can stop after you've touched down. So that was my little AvGeek aha moment on this trip coming home. So I just wanted to share that one.
Neat. Probably not your first choice of diversion points, but if you really, really need it, just having it there is a nice new option over the North Atlantic tracks.
Yeah, and I guess, fun thing about flying the A350 is that the A350 has 3 programmable alternate flight plans.
So they're just there if you need it?
Yeah, you've got your main flight plan, and then you can program up to 3 alternate flight plans. So as you're going and selecting diversion airports, along the way and creating equal time points and all sorts of those things, you can just have all of that plugged in and then just say, okay, we're diverting, click, done.
Huh. Technology. That's fun.
Technology. Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation with the pilots about, there are 2 pilots sitting on the flight deck and having a conversation about how all of this automation and technology is super helpful. And also in the back of their mind going, we're being designed away. One pilot is being slowly designed out. Airbus has been working on single pilot operations and building all of these synthetic vision apertures and technologies to support single pilot operations with, the long-term goal obviously here is no pilot operations because pilots are expensive.
They are, but I don't think they have to super worry about that in the immediate or even near future.
Yeah, exactly.
Not wrong to worry about it, but it isn't today's problem. It's not even tomorrow's problem.
Concerned about the direction of things, not necessarily worried about their jobs specifically.
Fair enough.
Let's get to the week's news. We begin with the restart of Boeing 737 production. Boeing confirms that it has restarted 737 production and intends to begin assembly of 767s and 777s as it brings all of its Pacific Northwest facilities back to production ready nearly 90 days after halting production because of the machinists' strike. So they came back in early November, but Boeing has not yet resumed production as they've had kind of a safety stand down because they didn't want to rush into anything, which seems like a good idea to me.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is going to dispute that that's a good idea, though that does seem like a pretty extended period of time, especially if you're one of Boeing's suppliers who is desperately in need of getting parts out the door so Boeing can pay you for them. But
right.
Good to finally see that production is ramping back up. Have there been any deliveries just yet? I don't think so, but at least production is back on track or beginning to get back on track.
Yeah, there were a few deliveries during the strike.
During the strike of aircraft that had already been
right,
but not completed.
I will double check to see what the delivery figures look like, but I haven't seen too much come out the door yet. On the other side of things, this is a never-ending saga, and this is getting very, very interesting very, very quickly. The judge presiding over Boeing's plea agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice has rejected the deal. So Judge Reed O'Connor, who is the judge in the Northern District of Texas, where the original deferred prosecution agreement was filed and the current plea, or I guess former plea deal, was filed, has said that the court is rejecting the plea deal for a variety of reasons. But the top line reason is the one that got the most headlines. The one that's buried a little bit deeper down below seems to be more important.
Yeah, the lead
So,
is kind of
yeah.
buried under the
Yeah,
nonsense.
I think due to current events, I think one side got a larger play. So the judge said, quote, "The plea agreement requires the parties to consider race when hiring the independent monitor. Additionally, the plea agreement marginalizes the court in the selection and monitoring of the independent monitor. These provisions are inappropriate and against the public interest." So importantly here, the independent monitor would have been appointed for 3 years to oversee Boeing's implementation of all of the agreement that it had reached with the government. And the judge is rejecting that. And because the agreement, he says, would have required the parties to consider race when hiring an independent monitor, and that argument is based upon a 2022 executive order issued by President Biden. So setting that aside, there's something that I think is even more important here. The judge also rejected the agreement because Boeing would not actually have to comply with the monitor's recommendations, and the court would not have had oversight over the monitoring program.
That seems a lot more noteworthy. Kind of makes it feel like the court and the monitor would have become the NTSB of court-appointed things at that point, as they would have just been making recommendations and have no actual power to do anything about it other than say, please do this for safety's sake and for your own sake. That just doesn't really make any sense if the whole thing here is to have an independent monitor making not just recommendations, but actually providing oversight over Boeing. If that oversight and recommendation is optional, kind of what's the point, right?
Exactly. Yeah. If you don't have to follow any of the recommendations, why go through
Why
the trouble?
even make them at all? All it would do is make people angry that somebody that the court has appointed has made recommendations that Boeing has not implemented. We've done that before. It's not good. We don't need to do it again. So this is a good reason to reject the plea deal. But now I guess we get to start over and wait longer for this to go through, or I feel like we're never going to see the end of this court battle.
So, yeah, we don't know what happens now, basically. They could do nothing, I suppose, but that seems unlikely. So I would assume we'll see another deal and we'll see if that one gets accepted or rejected. I honestly don't know at this point, but it's really up in the, I mean, there's not going to be a trial because Boeing's already pleaded guilty. So it's not like, well, they threw out the deal and so now they have to go to trial.
This
because
is more like sentencing,
we did it
almost.
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. Let us turn now to some of the announcements by airlines this week. Do you want to go to Seattle, perhaps?
Yeah, I think we should go to Seattle on a Hawaiian Airlines A330. How about that?
How about that? And where should we go from Seattle?
We should go not just to Anchorage, because that's a thing that's happening, but also we should go to Tokyo, Narita specifically, and also Seoul, South Korea, at some point in the near future. So this was not unexpected that Alaska would take parts of Hawaiian's fleet to do things that Alaska has wanted to do, which is run a global hub out of Seattle without having to rely on partners and really beat Delta over the head with a hammer, basically. Delta has tried to encroach on Alaska's hub in Seattle over and over and over, but it's never really been able to crack that nut in Seattle. But now Alaska, now that it is able to do so, is going to use Hawaiian Airlines A330s, not 787s, unfortunately, but at this point, A330s to operate, I think they said up to 15 global destinations by 2030 out of the Seattle hub. And the first destinations were Tokyo and Seoul, and also Anchorage. That's really more of a summer capacity / cargo play.
I mean, it makes sense to me, given that they want to beat back Delta at all costs, and that Alaska said, hey, yeah, we want to be a global airline. Up to 15.
It was open to 12.
Interesting.
Excuse me. It was 12 long-haul routes from Seattle by 2030. It will also open a new premium lounge in 2027, which is still quite a ways off, since Delta's doing that like sometime in the very, very near future. But Alaska did say that it was on track to obtain a single operating certificate in October 2025, but reiterated that it's okay. We will still operate both brands independently. So if you're flying to Hawaii, you're probably going to be on a Hawaiian aircraft. If you're flying not to Hawaii, you're going to be on an Alaska aircraft. That seems to be what's going on here, though. I don't know if that means that Alaska is going to rebrand some of these A330s in Alaska livery. I'm not quite sure. We'll have to look into some of that.
I liked the idea that you had earlier this week.
Oh, the one where I punched into ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Show me 787 and combine the Alaska and Hawaiian liveries. And
it did not do a terrible job.
I would say it was a great job. Probably the best thing I've ever created. And it was ChatGPT, but it had like kind of the Hecla Aurora looking front of a 787. If you're familiar with that from Icelandair, and the back had a very nice, what did ChatGPT call it?
It was the flower.
It was the flower. So it described it as the tail fin features a gradient transition blending Alaska Airlines' signature blue and green hues with Hawaiian Airlines' bold purple magenta flower motif. The only thing it missed was putting the lei and the hair of the face on the tail of the 787, like Alaska already does today for its ETOPS aircraft.
There you go.
I would very much like to see this.
We have a future in aircraft design.
Or ChatGPT does, I guess, but somebody does. But it's exciting to see Alaska lean into blending, let's say, the Alaska and Hawaiian fleets to do something rather ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm just interested to see, like, where else could they go? I mean, now that...
Wherever a 15-year-old A330 lets them go.
Oh, okay. Let's talk JetBlue, and let's talk first class. What?
Yeah, a very different story. So on the West Coast, you have Alaska merging with Hawaiian and quite successful at this point right now. Things are looking quite good for Alaska, putting that merger behind them, or really kicking into high gear. And then you have JetBlue, who has fallen on hard times with a failed partnership with American and a failed merger with Spirit, and absolutely rock bottom, terrible on time performance and not making any money. But in the quest to make more money, JetBlue has revealed through some internal communications and candidly to the Wall Street Journal that it will roll out first class seating sometime in 2026, perhaps. Though, as we know in this industry these days, add 2 years to whatever date an airline says. So maybe by 2030, they'll have a first class cabin, but I believe it will be 2 rows on A220s and 3 rows on all other Airbus aircraft. But it's going to come at a cost because apparently they're looking at keeping the number of overall seats on board the aircraft the same. So that means taking away legroom from the rest of the economy cabin, which they say will be at or better than their competition, which kind of makes me think, so what is it about JetBlue that is now differentiated? If you're offering the same legroom in coach as other airlines and you have the same entertainment and the same Wi-Fi, but a worse route network and fares that typically aren't that much lower, what would you say it is you do here? Why should I fly JetBlue over Delta or American or United with a vastly larger route network? I don't know, but JetBlue thinks first class seats are the answer. And right now they are not alone in that.
Everyone's chasing those premium dollars.
Especially
ultra low cost carriers,
like
or
Frontier.
Former ultra low cost carriers.
Frontier also announced, I believe last week, it is throwing its hat in the ring as well to offer first class style seating, which will begin before JetBlue in late 2025. So add a couple of years onto that, maybe by 2027, realistically. But even Frontier, who has prided itself for so long on offering nothing on board, has differentiated to the point where they offer regular seating, exit row seating, blocked middle seat Eurobiz style seating, and now they will even offer first class and it might even recline. In a seat first class that reclines, so they will one up Spirit if Spirit still exists in late 2025. But I think now, looking back, one of my personal concerns of JetBlue absorbing Spirit back then was I hope they don't take away the big front seat. And now we've kind of come full circle where there really won't be an airline operating in the US that doesn't have a first class style product and whose name isn't Allegiant.
I was just going to say, we're down to one, and then
There's
one.
one. I think Sun Country, all like 4 of their planes, but by the time this all happens, they might only be an Amazon cargo partner. They might not even haul passengers anymore. But Allegiant will really be, I think, the sole major airline not offering first class seating, which is crazy to think what's happened here in the US, while in Europe, like I just mentioned, the first class seating really isn't a thing on intra-European flights at all.
No. Not even a little bit.
Huge
Although
difference.
I will note that there are a few airlines that are looking to expand into a proper kind of business class or first class offering, including SAS. So it's coming, but
SAS
slowly
plus,
and weirdly.
Plus again?
No, they're getting rid of plus. It's all going to be industry standardization because you have to fit in with your friends at Air France KLM. But so it's coming, but slowly and weirdly, and maybe not.
Slowly and weirdly is the name of the aviation game.
Exactly. I'll just say that Air India ordered 100 more Airbus aircraft.
Sure, why not?
The opposite of slowly.
Yes. Well, I mean, they may be delivered slowly. We'll
Okay, fair enough.
We'll get to that. But Air India wants 10 more A350s and 90 A320 family aircraft, bringing its order tally with Airbus to 344 aircraft. That's a lot.
No. That cannot possibly be right.
That's a number that I read in the press release from Airbus.
Really? Oh, just Airbus. Oh, okay.
Just
okay.
Airbus. We're only talking
right.
Airbus. 344 orders just from Airbus. That doesn't
just
even
Airbus.
include all of the Maxes and the 777Xs that will seemingly never be delivered on order with Boeing. So Air India's got a lot of aircraft on order, which are already behind. I think I was reading the other day that the retrofit of its existing fleet are at least 6 months behind because, like I said, add 2 years to anything.
Because they don't have the new planes, so they need to keep the old planes running, and you can't take the old planes out of service to retrofit them. And it
doesn't matter anyway because you can't get the part.
Well, there's that. That has not stopped unnamed airlines from ordering 20 Airbus wide bodies, 15 A330-900 Neos, and 5 A350-900s.
All right.
Congratulations to
undisclosed airlines.
Undisclosed airlines, yeah.
That's amazing.
Very good.
Which, by the way, this Air India order was previously announced as an unnamed airline, an undisclosed airline, which is now disclosed.
Yes. This is a new undisclosed airlines order.
Amazing.
Let us move on to the safety portion of this particular episode. And we'll start with the fact that the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder from the Swift Air 737 that crashed near Vilnius, they're beginning the analysis of both of those. The German investigative agency was able to extract the data from both recorders, and the Lithuanian investigators have now begun their analysis of those recordings. The twin investigations here is interesting to me because there's a Lithuanian prosecutor who is performing a criminal investigation. At the same time, the Transport Ministry is carrying out a safety investigation. It's very interesting to me how this is working out. That's how it is working out, and that's how it's going for them, I guess, as they work to see if anything criminal happened at all, or if it's just an issue of flight safety. The NTSB has released its final report on a March 2023 in-flight upset that led to the death of one of the passengers on board a Challenger 300. We talked about this incident, I think, right after it happened, because it was initially reported as severe turbulence. And as the investigation went on, it became clear with the preliminary report that it was not, in fact, turbulence. And the final report lays out clearly exactly what happened. And again, NTSB safety reports, they don't assign blame. But our podcast can editorialize on the NTSB reports. And I think that we're comfortable in saying the pilots did not do a very good job at anything in this flight.
No, the NTSB report lays out a not very good sequence of events. So pre-flight, there were all sorts of warning messages presented to the pilots. So one of them was from the crew alerting system was rudder limiter fault advisory message, among other rudder and trim related messages. The NTSB, and I'll quote here, says, the second in command initially indicated that he would call maintenance control. However, after a short discussion with the pilot in command, both flight crew members agreed to continue the flight with the advisory message posted. The flight crew did not consult the airplane's go/no-go guide, but if they had, they would have found that the rudder limiter fault advisory message was a no-go item and that the minimum equipment list provided no relief to depart with that message displayed. That should have been the end of that flight. Seeing that message was on the screen, looking it up in the book, saying, oh, that means we don't go. End of story. But unfortunately, a passenger died on this flight because they didn't do the very, very simple procedure of looking it up in the manual or in their go, no-go guide, wherever that resides, to say, oh, I guess we no-go.
Yeah, and if they had called the maintenance control, and if they would, the action there is turn it off and turn it back on.
Which, that happened on my flight down to Virginia. We were delayed very slightly boarding because quite literally they had to reboot the E-175, which I think is something that happens all of the time. There were all sorts of error messages when they booted up the aircraft. So they literally turned it off and turned it back on again. And voila, we were on our way. It happens.
There you go.
A lot.
So let's back up and talk about what happened here. During the pre-flight of the aircraft, the pilot second in command was interrupted by an ice delivery to the aircraft. So catering showed up, said, hey, we got a bag of ice, as he was doing his pre-flight. He did not remove the right side pitot probe cover. And so finishes the pre-flight, that cover's still on. They go to take off, and the airspeed indications for the right and left side of the aircraft are very different. And because they were different for long enough, because remember that cover's still on the pitot tube, that creates a variety of faults because the computer goes, it's not supposed to be different. It's supposed to be the same. And if it's not the same, something's wrong. And so they rejected the takeoff because of the airspeed disagreements. But then, as Jason mentioned, as they were working through all of the crew alerting system messages, they didn't properly action those messages. And so that led to them taking off when they had a no-go item. And because there were errors in those systems, the aircraft was not trimmed the way it was supposed to be because the aircraft assumed things had failed. So it was trying to do its best to figure out what it was supposed to be doing, but that inhibited the use of the autopilot. And because the pilot in command kept using the autopilot when he wasn't supposed to, that led to the aircraft pitching up. It had been flying at a 3 degrees nose up attitude. It rapidly pitched up to 11 degrees in 1 second. The normal acceleration then rapidly rose, and I'm quoting from the NTSB report here, rapidly rose to 4G. The pilot in command then pushed the control column forward with at least 90 pounds of force, and the airplane pitched down to a near nose level attitude, and the normal acceleration was reduced to negative 2.3 Gs. The control column was subsequently pulled back through neutral, and the airplane rapidly pitched up to over 20 degrees nose up with more than 4 Gs of normal acceleration. It was worse than that, but the flight data recorder stopped recording because the G switch within the flight data recorder was tripped, thinking that something has gone terribly wrong. I should save all of the data I have.
Huh. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
So the cockpit voice recorder kept recording for a little bit longer because it had a separate battery backup. But the aircraft experienced incredible pitch oscillations between heavy G loading and negative G. And that oscillations are what led to one of the passengers suffering blunt force trauma, to which they later succumbed to after the aircraft had landed in Connecticut. But just a series of pilots doing exactly what they're not supposed to do. Because not only did they not look at the proper checklists, they were not doing what they were supposed to do based on the crew alerting messages that they were receiving.
Well, there's also something else interesting here on page 4 at the very bottom of the report, if you want to take a look. But
Sure.
interestingly, the passenger who was fatally injured was not wearing their seatbelt. And there's some interesting intricacies to why they may not have been wearing their seatbelt. So the in-flight upset occurred, they say, around 23,000 feet, about 9 minutes into the flight. However, these passengers apparently flew regularly with this crew who the NTSB notes it was regular practice for them to never turn off the seatbelt sign. So we have a set of passengers who are accustomed to the seatbelt sign never being turned off. So they are at their own discretion to know when it is safe to get up or to not get up. Very interesting here that would have played into it. And I know we've all been on flights where the seatbelt sign, you're on board for 6 hours and the thing never turns off. And of course, it gets bumpy the instant you latch the lock on the lavatory door. But there's something to be said here that the crew, in my opinion, was not protecting their passengers in leaving the seatbelt sign on always and forever, because then it doesn't mean anything. If you're just telling people to leave their seatbelts on at all times, but not when there actually may be turbulence or when they're experiencing issues of this sort that may lead to an in-flight upset, there's a switch for that sign for a reason. And to not use it just kind of seems, I don't want to say lazy, but it seems inadequate, let's say.
Sure. Given everything I've read in this report, I'm more than willing to, I think, call it lazy.
All right.
But we'll go with inadequate. And if anyone wants to read through the entire report, because it is, again, these reports are interesting studies both in technical things like how an aircraft actually works and how the systems work, but also really human factors. Because as Jason mentioned, this is all human psychology. It has nothing to do with how the aircraft actually works. So it all comes together. In this particular report, especially, there is a link in the show notes that you can download the full report from.
And there's no perfect approach to this whole seatbelt sign on all the time versus not on all the time thing. Even on my flight with Jal on the A350-1000, the seatbelt sign was off the vast majority of the flight. But even so, flight attendants, and I've never seen this before, would periodically go down the aisle holding an iPad showing a sign of a buckled seatbelt and saying, please keep your seatbelt fastened at all times, even when the seatbelt sign is not on, because if it's on, that should mean you should really be seated with your seatbelt fastened.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that I did find that quite interesting, and they did it quite often. So the whole seatbelt sign on versus not on thing right now, this is something maybe IATA wants to take a look at closer, because it doesn't seem, let's say, adequate anymore. But leaving it on all the time and leaving passengers to their own discretion to figure out when it's safe to get up or not, that is not the way to go about doing things.
No. The NTSB has issued a preliminary report, and the preliminary report is the first time that I heard about this particular incident. This happened back on October 19th, 2024, so a few months ago. A Diamond DA-40 was landing in Long Beach, as was a Boeing 737 operated by Southwest Airlines. The Diamond landed on runway 30 and was instructed to hold short of runway 26 right because of traffic. The Diamond did so and continued to hold short of 26 right for traffic. Meanwhile, the Southwest 737 was also cleared to land on runway 30. As the Southwest 737 was landing, the Diamond said, "Hey, tower, we're still here." And as they were on the landing rollout, Southwest said, "Hey, there's an aircraft on the runway."
Hey, when that happens.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. The NTSB notes that the aircraft came within about 850 feet of each other on the runway. Both taxied to where they were supposed to go without incident.
Yeah, kind of feels like anecdotally incidents of this kind of near disaster are trending down, which is good. But every now and then you hear something like this and you just can't help but cringe and go, ugh, that's not good.
Well, speaking of things that aren't good, IATA says everything is bad.
Oh, that sounds like IATA, I guess.
So that sounds like them. Jason, tell us more.
Well, IATA I'm not actually sure what conference this was, but speaking in Geneva, as they so often do.
This is their general meeting and media days and all that good fun stuff.
That's good. I got to go back to one
that we didn't go to
No,
because it was in Geneva.
But Director General Willie Walsh, who you may remember from BA, says
from such films as British Airways.
Such films as British Airways and high visibility vests. But things are not good in the industry. Airlines are not happy, and by design, passengers are not happy. Primarily, we're talking about the supply chain. And the headline here from Aviation Week hones in on quasi-monopoly behavior is the quote, that there are, as we know, very few suppliers for things like aircraft seats and lavatories and airplanes and engines themselves that power those airplanes. And perhaps the key suppliers appear to be immune from normal competitive dynamics because that's the quote from Lee Walsh, because there just aren't that many competitors out there. And those that are out there don't really seem to be all that willing or able to do anything about the supply chain issues that have really ravaged the industry. And the quote here is, they are benefiting from the supply chain issues. There is no evidence that they are resolving this. Goes on to say, and another quote, what they are doing right now, quote, just not good enough. So the article states that we all know that there are 700 aircraft around the world currently grounded because of things like engine durability issues, really looking at Pratt & Whitney, and I guess the 787 issues because of lack of spare parts and lack of capacity to get those engines in somewhere to get them repaired. IATA apparently is not loving this at this point. The quote from Aviation Week says here from Lee Walsh, we have been patient, but our patience has run out. The situation is unacceptable and insufficient effort has been put into resolving the issue. Engine performance is not where it should be. So all across the board, they're really unhappy on behalf of the airlines, and it's hard to really refute that. Aircraft deliveries are years late. When they are finally delivered, the engines don't work, and then it takes years to get those resolved. Things like cabins, seats, lavatories, overhead bins, galleys, everything, like we said before, add 2 years to whatever an airline says is going to happen. It's a direct result of this. Apparently, IATA is finally taking notice and says something's got to be done. Don't know what that something is, but at least somebody's paying attention.
I think we need more meetings.
More meetings in Geneva. We should go.
There you go. Let's close out the show with some news bites. Over the past couple weeks, we have Icelandair taking delivery of its first Airbus aircraft, an A321neo of the LR stripe. This aircraft goes a slight way towards the airline replacing its Boeing 757 fleet, which will happen eventually as it continues to take some LRs and some XLRs eventually. That aircraft is operating to European destinations at the moment, but they will eventually bring it to Seattle as the first North American destination.
Hey, it's first non-Boeing aircraft. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and it's a good-looking one too. I quite like what they've done with it. Kuwait has all of the A330neo variants. This week, they took delivery of their first A330-900. They also previously took delivery of the A330-800, one of few operators of that variant. American Airlines says they're not going back to Haiti in February, in part because the FAA has extended its don't fly to Haiti NOTAM through March, but also because they say, well, we might not go back until late February 2025, but we do want to go back. And finally, this one comes to us from a podcast listener in Australia. A few weeks ago, we talked about Qantas retiring their 717 fleet. And we made a big deal about this because the 717 has been a very hard worker in Australia, filling in on a lot of domestic trips. And as it turns out, its work is not done yet.
Never mind.
was retired for 10 days before being brought back into service for charter work, and now continues to remain in service for the Christmas season. So operating now on the East Coast between major cities in Australia for Qantas. So I guess we'll get to talk about Qantas retiring the 717 again at some point.
That might be a record from duration of time from retirement of aircraft to unretirement of aircraft. 10 days is
it's not a lot. I mean, barely enough to get home, take your shoes off, put your feet up. I mean, that's no time at all.
Yeah. Good for that aircraft.
Yeah. Let's see. This has been episode 298. 299 is next week, and that will be our last new episode of the year. Episode 300 will be off for episode 300. So it seems only fitting that we put something special together for that, and we've got some good stuff in store there. But then into the new year, we're really going to have to celebrate in a big way. So Jason, let's put our heads together and think about that. But if any of our listeners have any ideas what we could do to celebrate 300 episodes, we would be very grateful as well. So if you could email us at podcast@fr24.com, we would love to hear what you think we should do to celebrate 300 episodes of the podcast. And we're looking forward to your suggestions. This has been episode 298, and I am Ian Petchnick here, as always, with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.